Welcome to the ATA Podcast, where each month we bring you news and insights from the American Translators Association. Let's get started with a few quick announcements.
Book your room now for the ATA Annual Conference, October 22nd through the 25th. A limited number of rooms at the Westin Boston Seaport Hotel, the site of the conference, have been reserved at a discount for attendees. The special rates are available until September 29 or as space allows. Learn more at atanet.org/ATA66/hotel.
Hello, I'm Adam Sachs, and I am here on behalf of the American Translators Association, leading this interview for the ATA podcast. I'm here with Jamie Hartz and Yves Baudou. Jamie Hartz of Tilde Language Services is an ATA certified Spanish to English translator and transcriber specializing in legal, commercial, and logistics translations. Jamie is the chair of ATA's Public Relations Committee and is based in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Yves Baudou is an ATA certified French to English translator and independent project manager. She is past chair of ATA's Public Relations Committee and currently serves on ATA's Board of Directors and Executive Committee as the secretary of the association. She is based in the Denver, Colorado area. We have asked them both to join us today to talk about a couple new documents they co-authored, the Guide to Buying Translation Services and the Guide to Buying Interpreting Services. So thank you both for joining us today. Can you start by telling us about what these guides are?
Well, thanks for inviting us. It's exciting. We've been working on this project for a while, so we're excited to share it with the members.
Yes, likewise. Thank you so much, Adam. So the Guide to Buying Translation Services and the Guide to Buying Interpreting Services are both digital resources, and the goal of them is to help clients find and work with translators and interpreters, as the title suggests. But more specifically, these are materials that we here at ATA have developed not so much internally. A lot of what we publish at ATA is for translators and interpreters, and this is really outward focused. So it's for buyers and clients to be able to figure out what it is we do and how it is that they can optimally work with a translator and interpreter. So these are two different guides, but they are very much companion pieces. They go hand in hand.
And also just to emphasize, they're for clients, but they're also for potential clients who are new to our industry, who are new to buying these types of services and want to know, how do I go about it? And so it is for our members in the sense that these are guides that our members can share with clients and potential clients too.
Excellent. Thank you. Tell us about how this project developed and how the two of you ended up being the ones to put together the Guide to Buying Translation Services and Guide to Buying Interpreting Services.
Yeah, it had been quite a while since ATA had really had a publication really targeting this audience of potential buyers or clients, and something that would address the current landscape of how translation and interpreting industry looks, and especially technology and the changes that that's brought about. It's not a huge focus, but this is just something that we in the PR committee, the Public Relations Committee, felt like was really needed. And Eve and I decided to take the plunge and go ahead and spearhead it.
Very cool. I'm sure we have listeners who are curious about the process of collaborating on documents such as these. Can you walk us through what it was like from kind of the early planning stages all the way to kind of finalizing what is in effect the version that is now what we have?
Yeah, Jamie and I met consistently. We started out with the translation guide because we're both translators. And so we worked on developing the content, and then we worked with the designer to develop the actual layout and how it looks. And then Jamie roped in two wonderful interpreters. She could talk a little bit more about that, to kind of come up with the content for the interpreting guide. And then we had that, as she mentioned earlier, it's a companion piece to the translation guide, so that the layout is different, but it's very similar. And it kind of, you can tell by looking at them that they're different documents, but they also seem like they go together. So Jamie, do you want to talk a little bit more about the interpreting guide and the help we got on that?
Yeah, it was a really fun process that Eve and I got to take part in, where we were very much co-authoring this in Zoom calls, talking about what are the topics we need to cover and how do we want to say these things in such a way that buyers and clients will really connect with them. And so it was really nice then when we handed it off to the interpreter authors that we already had the translation guide and we're able to say, okay, here's a framework for you. We want a companion guide. So the content is going to be different, obviously, but some of it's going to be also very applicable. The explanation of what ATA is and the explanation about our language services directory still applicable, but you're going to want to rewrite certain things like make sure you talk about the different modes of interpreting and make sure you talk about um, the different types of technology involved in interpreting, where we may have talked instead about cat tools or something like that. Um, so, yeah, it was a very collaborative process with a lot of different stakeholders involved.
Yeah,
Very
and once we all had the content drafted, we also had a lot of different, like Jamie's saying, besides that, we kind of were very close to finishing each document. We went to went to different stakeholders, like different interpreters or interpreter committees within ATA to look at it too. So it wasn't just a small group. We got a lot of input from different important stakeholders within the association.
So, what were some key resources that you used in writing and assembling these guides, and that both on the two of you on the translation side and the interpreters who were assisting with the interpreter's guide?
I would say that the key, like the principal resources, were these human resources, like we talked about, that even I reached out to different stakeholders within our community of translators. And then Jason Knapp and Maria Perez were the two who wrote the interpreting guide. And they definitely reached out, especially I think in interpreting world, there are so many different applications for interpreters. There's everything from conference to medical to court to community to education, and it's so hard to cover all of those bases in one guide. They did an amazing job, but it took a lot of like different materials from different organizations, and ATA has already a ton of information on its website from past PR stuff and all of the different materials we use to educate clients already.
One of the interesting documents we used too was the membership committee has some documents that are really dynamic and interesting to look at that are for people who want to get started in the industry. And so that's the flip side of what we're doing. That's like Jamie said earlier, those are internal kind of documents, not internal, but reaching out to new people who might want to join the professions. But there's still interesting information in there that can be turned around to from a client perspective. So we also kind of went through those documents and thought, what can we use, or what are we forgetting, or what do we need to use from these documents also from a client perspective. And those documents too are very, we use a different kind of layout, but they're very engaging layout wise. So that inspired us as well.
And what did you consider some of the most important topics to cover in these guides? And did that, what were some of the most important topics covering in these guides?
Well, some of the things we covered, if members, I guess we can probably put in the show notes, I assume, and then we can also tell you guys where it's located on the ATA website. But if people go and actually look at the guides, they'll see we covered like how do you find an interpreter. Once you've found different people who are possible to use for your project, how do you choose that person or that individual or an interpreter or translator? Once you've chose that person, how do you start working efficiently with that person? And then on the ATA guide on interpreters, it says what are ATA credentials interpreters. In the translation guide, it discusses what does certification mean, that kind of thing. And we also talk a little bit in each guide about legal considerations, like what should you think of legally from a legal perspective when you're hiring an interpreter, when you're hiring a translator. And also we call it terms to know. It's a little kind of really specific glossary. The people who are not familiar with the industry, terms they need to know to kind of understand, some of our jargon. We don't want to get too jargony, right, when we're talking to people outside our industry, but there are some terms that we need to use that define our industry. And so we wanted the readers of this guide to know what those terms mean. So there's what I would call a really niche glossary or terms to know that people who are reading it can look at.
Yeah, I completely agree with Eve, and we'll just add that there we almost had to remove certain things or rewrite certain things once we realized, we have this tendency to write in a kind of jargony way as translators that maybe only folks from our own profession understand. And so as we would look at it through the lens of how is a buyer going to see this, there were certain things that we just, made sure to write in a certain way. Part of what we were trying to cover as far as topics was like debunking myths or righting certain common misconceptions that people might have. But I also think that a really cool product of what we've come up with here is that the guide is written so that a buyer or a user could use it to either work with an individual translator or interpreter or with an agency. And I think that that's a real benefit because the topics that we're covering apply to both, and it makes it very accessible for any kind of company or any kind of buyer to go directly to an individual translator or an interpreter. And I think that's a huge benefit to our members because we've got a lot of links to our language services directory where you can specifically find the exact translator that you want to work with, and there are instructions about how to work with that person and what kind of information they're going to need and what kind of questions they're going to ask. And I think that's really exciting because it helps our members connect with their clients a lot better.
Yeah, definitely. Um, and I think Jamie, you kind of started alluding to this in terms of like changing the way the language is written so that it makes sense to people who are not like knee deep into as language professionals, but kind of related to what you consider some of the most important topics to cover in these guides. Like, did your view and approach and in terms of what you considered most important, like what did you consider more or less important as you got like further in the process and closer to completing these guides? Like, did you think, this one thing was something that was going to be uh, very important to spend a lot more time on, and then you discovered, maybe less so, or there were certain things you didn't think of toward the beginning that merited more attention as you continued to put this together?
I'd say not necessarily because we did spend a lot of time kind of upfront, just, before we started writing, we really spent several weeks meeting, deciding like kind of like you're saying, like what categories, what is important to people who don't know that much about our industry, or even if they do know about our industry, because we want to talk to all types of clients or potential clients, right? We kind of came up with this framework, and then so once we started actually kind of writing the content, we'd spent a lot of time already discussing what you're saying, Adam. What do we want to cover with them? What do they really need to um, find out to work with someone successfully who's a translator or an interpreter? And I think it kind of, in a sense, it's not linear, but I mean the idea of where you have to find a translator first. Well, once you find some options, then how do you choose them? Then once you've chosen the person you want to do, how do you work with them productively? So it kind of goes in not a timeline per se, but sort of. And then we thought it was important to explain. And also, every time I say interpreter, I also mean translator, of course. I'm looking at the guide itself to remind myself of the categories. So excuse me, I mean
No, I
anytime I
mean
say interpreter,
it's
I
kind of
also mean
like when
translator.
you read a
Yeah.
document and sometimes it just like jumps back and forth between a different gender of a subject.
Exactly, yeah. So I think, but yeah, so then we also tried to think, like you're saying, well, once they're working with them, part of it in the choosing process too, like it can be overwhelming to people. I think even to Jamie and me sometimes because we're not translators, and we're not interpreters, we're translators, and it was very interesting for us to really get into the nitty-gritty of the credential process for interpreters for ATA. Like what does that mean when you have someone who's credentialed as an interpreter um, in the directory? And so we thought that's really important for people because, to us, not being interpreters, that's even not always clear to us. And then we understand that people don't even understand often what does certified translator mean. So we explained that, things that they kind of this high level. We don't want to get too granular either. I mean, I think it does get granular, and we've been able to strike the balance, but we also don't want to overwhelm people with things. Because once in a while we'd start laughing and say, "Oh, that's really important to us, as translation nerds or interpreting nerds," but this really isn't going to be that meaningful to people who are outside our industry. So we want to keep it at that level where we're giving them information that's valuable to them and that they can understand quickly and not have to reread things, 5 times to understand what we're talking about.
Yeah, I think in particular, that terms to know section at the end, I think even I really had to restrain ourselves because as translators, we love a good glossary, but buyers aren't necessarily going to bother to read that. So we really had to pick and choose what terms are really important for them to know and understand.
At that high level of a
Yes,
buyer.
right.
Yep. Yes, we do love a good glossary. I've spent too much time on that topic. That's for another day. Um, so how is ATA leveraging and disseminating the work and research in the Guide to Buying Translation Services and Guide to Buying Interpreting Services?
Well, one way is that, we mentioned at the beginning, I'm on the board of directors, and so every meeting we have, I've been giving them updates on the progress we've been making, Jamie and I, but the project as a whole, and encouraging people at that level to, share with other stakeholders that they interact with and let them know that this is out there. And it's also been published on the ATA website, and also I'll let Jamie talk a little bit about it. We want members to be using it too, so it's um, for clients and prospective clients. But Jamie, why don't you talk a little bit about how translators can interface with that and how they can use it?
Yeah,
Translators and
absolutely.
interpreters, sorry, members.
Both. It's only available digitally. It's online, but it's very easy to access. There's a flip book as well as a downloadable PDF. So, members can use it however they find it useful, but some ideas I can think of are that, it being made available on the ATA website gives it a lot of credibility and a lot of potential for leverage. Folks can share it on their social media, as ATA has shared it on their social media. We've also shared it on the Compass blog for buyers, and that's, the contents itself as well as links to the guide. And I would consider even like sharing with your own clients to let them know, here's some considerations you might want to take into account when you're choosing, you know, a translator. Obviously, if you're working with this person already, then they've already selected you as a translator and interpreter. But as they work with other languages, or if their needs were to expand, and you being an ATA member, it's a great opportunity for our members to be able to share something that their professional association has put out, and that, demonstrate that this is I'm stumbling over
Kind
my
of a best
words.
practices approach.
Yes,
Yeah, a
best
best practices
practices,
approach. Yeah.
exactly.
And I guess one last sort of related question to that. Like you both just talked about, how can translators and interpreters and potential clients take advantage of this to kind of hone in on that a little bit more. What are your thoughts on like someone who's a translator or interpreter who's approaching this guide who is newer to the trade versus someone who's more of a veteran in the trade? And then from the prospective client side, if it's an agency who's looking at these as a resource versus an independent or direct client who's looking at these resources, like where, what are some of your thoughts in terms of where the guide will speak to them in a way that's most useful?
Well, I do think with people, especially who are new to our industry, it would be helpful to them too, coming in and kind of, you're learning new things all the time about the industry, kind of shaping the way you work. And so you could, people who are new to our industry, but who are on our side of the industry, I mean, not buyers, but our translators or interpreters, can review the documents and to see, what ATA is putting forth as best practices, so that they might want to integrate that into their own practice if they aren't already some of the things we talk about.
Yeah, if I were just getting started in the industry, for example, I might look at the list of different ways that a client may select a translator and say, oh, I already have some expertise and I already have some amount of education, but I don't have any credentials. And that's one of the major sections here.
Mhm.
Maybe I'll pursue a credential, or maybe I'll pursue a specialization. So I would, if I were, just getting started in the industry, I would encourage people to just use it as a way to see what buyers should be looking for, and try to fulfill those needs. And then for buyers and clients, I really hope that it can serve as, like Eve was saying, kind of a step-by-step guide, in a sense of, okay, you need a translator. Where are you going to go to look for one? And once you've found some, how are you going to choose them? And once you've chosen one, how are you going to work with them? And there really literally are, kind of some step-by-step processes there of
Mhm.
identify your target audience, establish your deadline, and things like that. That's in the guide that I hope folks can really reference as a useful.
And I think too, because we kind of categorized it in those types of stages, that someone who thinks like, oh, I don't need help choosing someone, but now I really need help. I'm not sure how to work with them most efficiently. They can focus on that section of the guide. They don't, if they already feel comfortable with one of the areas, they don't need to read that part. They can read the other part. And it's broken out now pretty clearly so that they can focus on what they feel they need.
Excellent. So wrapping up, do you two have anything else to add to tell us about these new guides?
Well, I would say that I can tell everybody where they are. It's at atanet.org/client assistance/buying language services. But if you just Google ATA or American Translators Association buyer's guides, they'll pop up. So that
Yes,
is
and
one way you can go look at them yourself.
And we'll definitely put that link in the notes for this podcast as well. So definitely take a
Okay.
look there. I mean, whether you're typing this in while listening to us or just looking it up there, yeah, we're doing a lot to make these as accessible as possible. So yeah.
On a personal note, it was just a really fun project. So I would encourage people, if you have something that you want to help ATA do, pick a colleague and work on it together, because Jamie and I had a lot of fun and we got to know each other better, and just kind of encouraging everyone to collaborate on things that you want to do for ATA.
Wonderful.
Absolutely. I second that. And I, again, encourage folks to share this material, this resource. ATA can obviously share it as we have connections with the outside world and with journalists and with buyers, but it's our members who are really on the ground working with clients and working with users. So anybody who's listening, or any members or anyone who has that kind of connection, we just encourage you to use the resource and share it with anyone who might be interested.
Great. Well, thank you two so much again. Really appreciate all your work on this, and really appreciate you taking the time to speak with us on the podcast about it.
Thanks for inviting us. Thank you, Adam.
Thank you so much. This was great.
My pleasure.
That's a wrap. To learn more about the American Translators Association, including how to join, visit atanet.org. Until next time.